Hello. This video is going to provide an update from one of the propagation teams from the MTEP 2.0 Research Hub. The members of this hub include Alyson Lischka, Yvonne Lai, Dana Franz, me, Wendy Smith, and Sarah Hartman. We are thinking about boundary objects as a lens for looking at the work of networked improvement communities. But before we can ask about a boundary object, first we wonder, what are the boundaries that exist in MTEP teams? A NIC in MTEP 2.0 brings together people from different institutions. These usually are universities and K-12 schools or districts, but sometimes within universities, it includes departments of education and departments of mathematics. We all know there can be big boundaries between those kind of departments. So the NIC overall can be seen as a third space, bringing together people from these different institutions who are trying to come together and do work together.
So within that third space, or around those boundaries that are existing, we have what we call boundary objects. Yvonne, why don't you tell us about boundary objects?
So boundary objects, one way to think about them is that it's some kind of artifact and a process around those artifacts that helps different communities collaborate with each other, even when they come in with different values, different norms, different ways of thinking about things. My absolute favorite example of a boundary object is from the paper that introduced them by Susan Lee Starr and her collaborators. And it's about a natural history museum back in the turn of the last century, when the museum researchers were interested in the effects of industrialization on ecology in California. And to do that, they needed to know what the effect on the wildlife was. And so they had these census for wildlife sightings that they engaged conservationists in. So these conservationists and bird watchers, they're just out there trying to enjoy nature. They care about the science. They want somebody to do the science, but they're not scientists. But what they can do is say what animals that they saw and what trees that they saw and how many and where. And so they were able to collaborate because they were happy to fill in these census. And then the researchers collected all of these different census forms through this whole process. And then the researchers were able to document what kind of effects there even were on ecology and push that conservation agenda forward, as well as being able to back it up with really solid research. All right, so that's in early 19 something, way before computers even existed. What does that possibly have to do with teacher education today?
So when we look at MTEP and think about boundary objects, one of the biggest boundary objects we have is the driver diagram. So we have a driver diagram that helps all the different members of our NIC understand what our goals are and how we're going to approach those goals. So it's a communication tool between the different entities in our partnership. We also think that PDSA cycle documentation is a boundary object. Something that helps you communicate what work you're doing with all of the different parties that are involved. I'm going to hand it over to Sarah now.
Well, you might be wondering why the research team is even considering this as part of our MTEP work. Because one of our key goals of this research is understanding what supports the work of NICs involved in the MTEP 2.0 community when they're actually trying to align their programs with the AMTE standards. We have a hypothesis that these boundary objects can actually give us some evidence of the work that's taking place in a third space that's created by these boundary objects. It's creating a common space where people can come together and work towards a common goal. And we were also interested in how that type of work can be leveraged by other NICs or related to future efforts in things that act very similarly to MTEP. I'm going to hand it over to Dana now.
So I guess everybody is wondering, what are some things that we are finding in our research? We're early on in the research process of really doing a deep dive with this, but some things that we have found are that some teams are treating the documents as an assignment, where others are using the documents to center and ground their meetings. And we're also finding that teams are using their PDSA cycle documentation as a focus for their meetings and are able to easily articulate the progress they are making on their drivers. And finally, The driver diagrams for some of the teams evolve from year to year and show how the teams have grown or developed as well as progress on their PDSA cycles, and they can see the progress that they're making. So those are just a few of the initial findings that we have. And so Alyson, I'm going to toss it back to you.
So as you think about how you're using your boundary objects, your PDSA cycles and your driver diagrams, you might consider what role they're serving in your team. Are they supporting communication? Are they helping you progress in your transformation work? All things that you can be thinking about. And when we have more to share, we will let you know.